children of anti-vaxxers who grew up and got yourselves vaccinated. What's your story? How did your parents take it? Serious. I had an idea they were anti-vaxxers, but it was never confirmed. They mentioned my younger brother wasn't, but it was justified because we were living in the mountains of Montana and it was too far a drive to the doctor. I assumed I had been as I was born in civilization and we didn't move to the hills until I was 3. We were homeschooled. My older brother had trouble at college with his immunizations and mom said all the paperwork was lost when they moved. I was 30 years old and I was offered a job at a university helping train doctors. Started getting paperwork asking for proof of vaccinations. I just said test me and give me whatever I need. But I know I've had chickenpox. Turns out I had nothing. No antibodies and I'd never had chickenpox either. Mom said I had. Lit up both arms with a run of shots over the next 3 months. All paid for by Vanderbilt. Thank you Vandy. Never forget telling my boyfriend and he yelled you've been to Mexico. Twice and Europe. Oh my god. Called my mom and said hey I'm getting a job and they say I've never been vaccinated. Was I? She got very defensive and said no. She hated making us cry as babies and they're bad for little kids. Also, did I really need them? She then tried to talk me out of them. Since I know how they work I felt very okay letting her know I'd already starting the process, and thank God for herd immunity. I'm so thankful for all of you protecting me until I found out. She hated making you cry as babies. Dang lucky you didn't end up brain damaged from chemical meningitis or the like. What a freaking excuse. Pardon me, regular meningitis. So sorry I talked out of my butt. Mum got rubella when pregnant with me. As a result I was born severely deaf, so there you go. Life's not the best. Y'all don't be freaking stupid. Yes, my name here is very relevant, thanks guys LMAO. Interestingly, it seems as though you can lose your rubella immunity. I was immune during my first pregnancy, but then when tested for my second just 2 years later I was no longer immune and advised to avoid people. My mother stopped getting me immunized when I was 5. My dad wanted us immunized, but since mom was against it my little brother and sister never got theirs. I got completely caught up once I turned 19. Dad got remarried a few years ago and he and his new wife are apparently anti-vaxxers now and believe that my baby sister's issue with one of her pinky fingers was caused from something his wife got while pregnant, and the entire thing is just completely wackadoodle. Vaccines don't mess up pinky fingers. I just don't get how that works. LOL. Hey, this is relevant to me. My parents chose not to vaccinate my sister and me. They have some unique ideas about science and medicine. We were also homeschooled, if that clarifies anything. We both wound up volunteering at hospitals at different points in our lives, so we had to get caught up anyway. For me it was at age 20, for an internship at a mental health facility. It was a little awkward explaining to the nurse why I had nothing on my record, but she was understanding overall. I did tell my parents, and I thought they would be really upset. They were for a little bit, but they also recognized that I'm an adult and it's my choice, even if they think it's a bad one. I think they were also more concerned about exposing me to anything when I was developing, versus now they figure my body can take whatever I put it through. My big concern now is what will happen when I get around to having children of my own in a few years. I think they'll see me as a bad mother if I get them vaccinated, so I'm anticipating some fireworks. The real war for me as a mother was getting my parents to vaccinate themselves. No baby time unless they got fluent DAP. They aren't even anti-vaxxers. My in-laws lean more crunchy anti-vaxxy, but they happily got the shots. My mom tried to lock horns with me while I was on bed rest and in very delicate condition. It took me telling her they wouldn't get to see baby for her to get the shots. I didn't receive any vaccinations through childhood due to my parents' beliefs. Once I got to college, I did my own research on them, learned the actual science behind them, and got all vaccinations in college. I then went to medical school, and yet they still don't believe me and my medical degree regarding vaccinations. Holidays can get awkward. You can't reason someone out of a position they didn't reason themselves into, sadly. I was not vaccinated as a child because my mother thought vaccines were evil, unchristian, and other ridiculous things. This was in the early 80s before all the autism BS, but she had her own unique theories. I got myself vaccinated when I went to university. My mother was disappointed and wanted to write a letter to the school explaining her religious views on vaccines, as she had done for years to keep me exempt, but I decided to go with science. The most amusing part was going to doctors trying to get childhood vaccines as an adult. One doctor didn't even believe me. He actually laughed. "What do you mean you need an MMR?" The doctor who eventually got me sorted had to look up a schedule and sort of wing it because it is something she had never dealt with before. We had a good laugh. Though DTaP is no joke. That crap freaking hurts. My mother was not happy but sort of conceded that getting vaccinated as an adult was less risky than as a baby or whatever. TDAP is weird. I barely even felt the stick and had no issues with it. My husband got a bruise and the sniffles, but to be fair, I think he was probably coming down with something anyway and he just wanted something to complain about. Hey, one I can answer. My dad was the anti-Vaxxer. My mom was mostly ambivalent. Neither my brother or I were vaccinated at birth, and I didn't get my shots until I turned 19. My brother had to get a tetanus shot once when he was 6. Due to an injury, it burned my dad up for a while. His reasoning was typical. He believed that the mercury in the vaccines would cause us to somehow develop autism. My parents were also pretty hippy-dippy compared to most baby boomers, so they were concerned about chemicals and all that as well. Joke's on them, though, because both my brother and I are Aspies regardless of being unvaccinated. It was always a pain in the butt whenever we had to do school-related paperwork or field trip stuff, because my parents would have to produce a letter stating that it was their religious right to keep us untainted by vaccination. We were never a religious family. I wasn't a super sickly child, with a few exceptions, but my younger brother suffered a lot. He got pneumonia when he was real little, like 3-4. They had to keep him in the hospital and I remember my dad taking care of me at home while my mom stayed in the room with my brother. About a year or two after that he got walking pneumonia and again was hospitalized. He's also allergic to dang near everything and has bad asthma now. He has epilepsy and we both have chronic migraines. I never had anything seriously life-threatening in terms of illness, but there was a nearly year-long period where I had strep throat almost every other week. I should have had my tonsils out. They wanted to intubate me at one point but for whatever reason changed their minds. But my dad threw a fit about having any surgeries performed. I also developed shingles when I was 13, which my father initially treated as poison ivy and left mostly untreated until my mother intervened. I still have little to no feeling on swatches of the left side of my body from the blister scars. That sucked. I did, however, have to get my vaccinations when I turned 18 and enrolled in college. He was not pleased about that, and actually we didn't talk for almost a year because of my decision to get vaccinated. Eventually we worked things out, but it took a while. I'll be vaccinating any children I may have in the future, though. TLDR. Wasn't vaccinated until I chose to do so myself as a legal adult. BC parents were afraid of autism. My brother and I were sick a lot as a kid, with some really preventable and stupid illnesses. I plan on vaccinating any children I have. When I was 19 I had to get some vaccines in order to start college and my mom was not helpful. First she tried to get me exempt from the vaccines and when that didn't work she sent me into the clinic, alone, with completely false outdated info. I was super embarrassed when the nurses looked at my notes and told me that none of it was correct. But luckily they helped me figure out what I needed and didn't shame me too much for not having a previous vaccination record. A couple years later I went back in to get the rest of the recommended vaccines. My sister had her first kid and the first grandbaby last year and our mom has been pushing her not to vaccinate. Fortunately, my sister has chosen to vaccinate. She still is trying to get us to watch a documentary about it to change our minds. Now all us kids just don't talk to our mom about vaccines because it always turns into an argument. For everyone asking, the documentary is called The Truth About Vaccines. I haven't watched it and I don't intend on wasting my time watching it because even if I proved everything wrong my mom won't accept anything else as fact. All of us kids have argued with her about it and we all decided it's better to just not discuss it. My mum didn't get the measles vaccination because at the time she thought it caused autism. She was kinda one of the first anti-vaxxers, wrote to papers about it everything. Anyway, a girl in our social group caught meningitis and died. Basically freakishly uncommon. After that, Mum was really scared the same thing could happen to me with any disease and basically begged me to get up to date with my shots. I guess the main takeaway is that when my mum was younger and inexperienced, she thought everything was a danger. She honestly thought she was doing best by me, I guess. Still has a bit of a problem trusting experts, though, if her reaction to the Charlie Gard case is anything to go by. I think it's important to recognize that parents aren't intentionally trying to hurt their kids. Well, most. I'm glad she decided to get you vaccinated after that though. It must have been terrifying. As soon as I turned 18 I got all of my vaccines up to date. My mother stopped after I was 7 or so. My dad didn't agree with her but respected her wishes. After I got them updated through my dad's health insurance she was annoyed about it but I eventually managed to explain herd immunity to her, and also found enough sources calling that out the study that claimed vaccines cause autism that she finally admitted she was incorrect, but still won't admit that vaccines aren't bad for you, saying that they have too much mercury in them. It's hard for people to admit they are wrong so the fact that she did even a little is great. My mother was an anti-vaxxer for many years. She didn't have me vaccinated unless I could not get out of it for school. She used herbal remedies to treat health issues and I do not blame her for doing what she did. She had 5 children. My father quit his job to start his own company and for 10 years he didn't make a profit. She was doing everything she could to decrease medical bills and was concerned about the chemicals people were pumping into their body. It became an issue when my sister was 13 and she got a bad cough. It got worse and worse despite my mother using herbs and taking her to a holistic doctor. My sister was on about 30 different herbs and getting worse. One night, she had such a bad attack that she couldn't breathe and her barking cough woke up the entire house. She was sick with pertussis, an infection that is vaccinated against in kids and has been brought to near extinction in the United States due to vaccination, but has been making a comeback due to anti-vaxxers. My sister, the one who had pertussis aka whooping cough, followed in my mother's footsteps due to ignorance, and I joined the military. In the military, you get vaccinated for everything. I have been vaccinated for polio, anthrax, rabies, tetanus, diphtheria, pertussis, yellow fever, Japanese encephalitis, and many more with no side effects. I began working in the medical field and went to school at George Washington School of Medicine while I was deployed. Then, my wife got pregnant. I had the resources to find and understand the scientific answer to the question anti-vaxxers ask: do vaccines cause autism and health issues? Short answer, no. I saw people who weren't vaccinated dying of diseases we had nearly wiped from existence through vaccination. I saw ignorance cause health issues when simple treatment was turned away due to religious or personal belief. So I told my mom and sister that we were going to vaccinate my son. The issue being that TDAP, the tetanus, diphtheria and pertussis vaccine can't be given to a child until he is 6 months old. I told them if they wanted to me a son, they would have to get vaccinated. My mother conceded because there wasn't going to be anything keeping her from meeting her first grandchild. My sister told me she wasn't sacrificing her beliefs for me, and I told her, that's fine. I'm not letting you near my son until he is vaccinated then. Why? Because his death is not worth your pride. She folded a month before he was born. Now the rest of my family has slowly been getting vaccinated for other stuff and looking to me for medical advice. I tell them that I love them and want the best for them, and show them peer-reviewed scientific articles on proof against their beliefs. They are slowly switching to my side. About time I see a nice success story come out of this ridiculous movement. Good job. My parents were very against it, never particularly vocal about it, but growing up, my schools would organize mass vaccinations for all the kids, MMR etc, and I was always mysteriously off sick those days. My school never noticed and I was always pretty happy as I have a terrible phobia of needles and never really understood the health implications. I've never had any health problems but I've had partners weirded out by it. I was dating one guy who didn't want to go near me once he found out I hadn't had any vaccinations. That felt odd. Last year there was a measles outbreak at my university and I was very nervous about it. Called my parents for advice and their response? Go get the vaccine. Classic. I'm guessing their opinions have changed over the years, but they're too proud to say outright that maybe they were wrong and their children's health could now be at risk. About time I got the rest of them done. Well, that was quite the turnaround on their part. Kind of got tired of the "you're a bad person for trying to protect your parents" messages. I'm still a minor and confused. None of that felt helpful. I got my own shots and I did what I could. And it's hard to ask for advice because of bad reactions I get to it. I appreciate every message that tried to help me or offered me spare inhalers, etc. But I don't feel comfortable sharing this story. Godspeed. I'm an asthmatic. Your sister could die if she had a bad enough attack. It's very painful and terrifying to not be able to breathe. Whether you want to get them in trouble or not, your parents are putting your sister's life at risk and subjecting her to a great deal of physical pain and discomfort. Please say something. My parents used to not vaccinate me or any of my 4 siblings, but when I was like 3 years old, me and my siblings all came down with whooping cough. It scarred my lungs and I have yellow stains on my teeth because the high fevers cooked my adult teeth inside my head. My parents vaccinated us after that. I am not and have never been mad or spiteful to my parents for not vaccinating me. I don't really consider them anti-vaxxers. My parents were very young when they had me and they were also very impoverished. They were real big hippies and believed that anything I needed, including immunity, God would provide. Me and all of my siblings were raised really well and my parents have always been very loving. They were just naive and doing what they thought was best for me and my siblings. Jesus Christ. 5 kids with whooping cough. That must have been a nightmare for your parents. If you're here to tell me something along the lines of "if only there was a way to prevent whooping cough and the parents are dumb," please refer to the 10+ people before you in this very thread who have done the exact same thing. My story sort of has a twist where if I hadn't gone against their wishes, I could be seriously ill or dead beyond the normal threat. My parents were against the MMR vaccination as my older brother was diagnosed with Asperger's shortly after he received it. I'm the youngest child and so never got the jab. Even though mumps actually caused my mum to go half deaf as a teenager, it always made me uncomfortable knowing I wasn't protected and I was in strong mind to do it eventually. But of course it's hard going against your parents' beliefs when they felt so strongly at what had happened to them. To me it felt like a form of denial of the autism in the family, which they see as much worse than it is. My brother is an amazing guy and they should give him more credit. Before you go to uni you have to get a meningitis jab. While I was at the doctor's, the doctor, very much reminded me of Emma Thompson, suggested giving me the MMR. I told her my parents were against it and she said she'd give it to me now and then in a few months I could tell them and prove that I was absolutely fine. So I did that. A few months after receiving the full vaccination, my flatmate and close friend got diagnosed with rubella. It spread all over her body causing glandular and scarlet fever. She spent over a month in hospital and was in a fatal position. If I hadn't done it at that moment, I could have been in serious trouble. And rubella isn't common here at all. So if in doubt about going behind their backs, do it for yourself and your own safety, and that's the only excuse you need. I'm old enough to have had rubella as a child. The biggest problem was it was caused severe birth defects if a pregnant woman caught it. I was just plain sick for a few days. Your flatmate was probably seen by an older doctor who knew what she was seeing. Young docs don't get to see these things anymore. My mom is against vaccines and I grew up in a very against vaccine school and was treated by homeopathic and holistic doctors. I used to believe all that crap. Then I started med school and changed my mind to vaccines aren't bad but they aren't necessary. Then I did a rotating at a pediatric hospital in the neurological area. That was a huge eye-opener. Meningitis is an awful disease and anti-vax never talk about it. The children I saw were the ones that survived and had brain damage afterwards. It was awful to see kids that could have had a perfectly normal life to end up like that. A coworker's brother-in-law ended up brain dead from meningitis. He and his flatmates thought he had the flu in the morning. In the afternoon they found him unconscious. His life support was switched off after 2 weeks. I'm in my early-ish 20s and I have never had vaccines. However, I am very much for them. I'm actually embarrassed that I don't have them. My parents didn't vaccinate me as a child for a legitimate medical reason, so they say, but my brother was not vaccinated either. I am pretty sure I can get them now. regardless of if the medical situation is the truth or not. I'm on the search for a general doctor in my new state right now to ask questions and get vaccinated. I'm curious if there were any risks involved in getting vaccinated as an adult. The only thing to make sure of is that the reason you weren't vaccinated was because of an allergy. My husband's parents are pro-science, pro-vaccine, but because of his congenital condition and a very specific allergy, there was one vaccine he wasn't able to get, which is why herd immunity is so important. When the HPV vaccine came out, there was a bunch of stories on the news about girls having poor reactions to it, getting seizures, comas, most of it nonsense, but my mother saw the news stories and chose not to get me vaccinated. But then, right after college I had a brief bout of thyroid cancer, and decided I would take every precaution I could to not get more cancer, so I got the shots. I think at the time I didn't tell my mom, but afterward it came up. She was more huffy than anything else, and defended her thoughts at the time, but accepted my decision and reasoning. Also, there was the argument that it would make girls more promiscuous and it would encourage consequence-free freaking. Utter nonsense. My mum is non-believer of vaccines. I am only 16, but I believe that scientists and doctors know what they are doing more than what my mum does. As of this moment I will vaccinate myself when I can, and my kids. I am able to get myself vaccinated at 16 without parental consent. At least I think I am. But what is stopping me is my relationship to my mum and her wishes for me to keep things natural. Because of this, I will do it when I have moved out and without my parents and I in the same household. I am from New Zealand. Why my spelling of mum is with a U. New Zealand has no problems with 16-year-olds visiting doctors by themselves, but I haven't looked into whether a parent would have to sign a statement saying whether they are okay with this or not. Thank you all for your advice on the issue. You have all been so supporting. If I could give gold to all of you without becoming poor, I would in a heartbeat. It's good you have your own thoughts and feelings on the matter. If it makes you feel any better, I had autism way before any of my vaccinations. My parents never explicitly said they were anti-vaccine to me, but I was never vaccinated as a child. I actually caught measles, mumps and rubella on separate occasions. Luckily diagnosed quickly enough to not cause any major health implications long term, but still a pretty miserable experience each time. So yeah, thanks for that. I've since had the vaccines, despite in theory having an immune system that could handle them. I was vaccinated when I was a baby as part of a mandatory vaccination program in the Soviet Union, but my parents wouldn't get boosters after we moved to the States. My family is pathologically distrustful of doctors and medication of any kind and prefers homeopathy and alternative medicines. I didn't realize I wasn't fully vaccinated until I went in for a physical in college. Up till then, I'd just assumed I'd been fully vaccinated in Russia, because that's what my parents told me. I got all my shots up to date and I just never mentioned it to my parents. Their anti-medicine stance has softened as they age, but I generally avoid the topic because I can't handle their bulls and it never goes anywhere anyway. That said, I had a baby this past December in the middle of a really bad flu season and I told my parents that they weren't allowed to see the baby until they could produce proof of a flu shot. This is absolutely something they'd lie about, so yes, I demanded written proof. They both got one as soon as they realized I was serious. Their anti-medicine stance has softened as they age. Probably has something to do with deteriorating health and needing that medicine now that they're not in perfect young person health. My story is a bit complex. My mother is an avid anti-vaxxer, but didn't become that way until after my late sister died. She blamed the vaccines she got a few weeks before her death. She was 3 months old for it, instead of the SIDS tragedy it was. My next youngest sibling was allergic to eggs, and so didn't get any vaccines until she was 8, after my parents were divorced and we had to move to a new state with new laws. My 2 youngest siblings have never been vaccinated against anything. Whoa, I'm sorry for your loss. Thank you for sharing. If you are new to the channel, you can subscribe. I publish new videos every day. Until then, check another video. Bye for now.